Well, Oubai Shahbander is from the Syrian Support Group. That's one of the organizations that attended today's talks in Istanbul. Oubai, thank you very much for joining us on the show. Now, it seemed that there was overwhelming consensus to attend these talks, but we need to keep in mind that there were 14 no's, 2 abstentions, 1 blank vote, and 44 members walked out. So what credibility really does the SNC have in attending these talks?
Absolutely. This is a very difficult decision, but it was a decision that had to be made as part of the political process. The deliberations were part of a healthy debate within the opposition, but at the end of the day, the decision was made to attend Geneva to pursue a political process and to put the pressure on the Assad regime to commit to a transitional governing body that leads to a free and democratic Syria without Assad and his leadership in power. Now, in terms of credibility, what is really interesting here of this decision, what's really interesting here is that you actually have the endorsement of pursuing a political process to a Syria free of Assad that's been supported by the Supreme Military Council Command of Revolutionary and Military Forces. Just today, after the announcement was made that the Opposition Council will be attending Geneva, we saw an official announcement by the Supreme Military Command leadership that they support any resolution that guarantees a political transition of authority that will take place to bring about the aspirations of the Syrian people.
Is that really the case? I mean, we do know, and we definitely understand the aim is to topple Assad here, but we also know that the coalition is not quite in touch with the rebels who are actually doing the fighting on the ground. The SNC don't seem to have much influence as to the actual rebel commanders that are doing the fighting. So what authority does the coalition have, particularly as they're not united when it comes to the Geneva talks? What authority do they have to actually negotiate peace for the Syrian people?
Absolutely. In order for any peace process to be successful, you have to have the buy-in of the revolutionary forces on the ground. And what's interesting here in Istanbul, in Turkey, as these deliberations have taken place, there have been a series of meetings by senior opposition officials with representatives of the major Free Syrian Army groups. In fact, I myself have sat down with many of the leadership and the senior officials from the leadership of the Syrian Opposition Council have been sitting and consulting extensively with the leadership of the Free Syrian Army. And so you do have credibility. In fact, the Syrian Revolutionaries Front, one of the principal groups belonging to the Supreme Military Council on the ground, that's been taking a leading and active role in fighting the al-Qaeda forces and fighting the Assad regime militias, has been part of this process, part of these consultations. And there's actually a great deal more linkage between the Syrian opposition coalition leadership and the Free Syrian Army than many people realize.
Right. I want to go on to talk about the prospects of these talks that are going to take place. Now, the Syrian National Coalition is going to these talks with the aim of toppling the Assad government. The regime says that they're attending the talks with the aim of ridding the country of what they call terrorism. This really doesn't bode well for a successful summit, does it, given as there is no common ground?
Well, as President Jarba of the Syrian Opposition Coalition mentioned earlier in his statement, the pathway to countering terrorism in Syria is to ensure a Syria free of the Assad forces, which many Syrians believe is the core root of extremism and terrorism in Syria today. It is very clear in the United Nations invitation and the parameters set forth by the Geneva I protocols.
Let me just interrupt you here, Oubai. The Assad regime regards the SNC as terrorists, and the Assad forces seem to be gaining valuable ground in the conflict. Now, they basically have the upper hand in attending these talks, don't they? Whereas the coalition comes divided.
Actually, interestingly enough, we do not believe the Assad regime has leverage going into these talks. Since January 3rd, the Free Syrian Army, the military wing of the Syrian opposition, has led an active and sustained campaign against al-Qaeda. It is undeniable that the Syrian opposition forces today represent the antidote to extremism, are taking the lead in fighting al-Qaeda. So the Assad regime's narrative that is the only alternative to extremism has been proven demonstrably false by the opposition forces. The onus is now on the regime to actually demonstrate its commitment to following through a transitional governing body. The opposition, on the other hand, has shown that it is a credible partner with the international community and is ready to pursue a political process. It is a political process that cannot be open-ended, and all eyes on the world right now are on whether the Assad regime is willing to actually step forward and demonstrate its commitment to peace and stability. If it is not, and we believe that the true colors of the Assad regime will be unveiled to the world very shortly.
Right. Now, as part of the negotiations, the coalition is asking President Assad to step down, and they want to basically get rid of his regime. Is there any ground for negotiation here in terms of peace? Is there any way that the SNC would be able to work with the Assad regime to come to some sort of agreement as to perhaps Assad stepping down, but his people or his government staying in power and helping the SNC to get rid of the country, to get rid of al-Qaeda in the country?
Well, first of all, it's actually interesting that the Syrian Opposition Council and the Supreme Military Council have actually been fighting al-Qaeda and countering extremist forces in Syria without the Assad regime. In fact, it's been really, the Assad regime has only been pouring fuel on the fire of extremism in Syria. Now, a central element of the Geneva protocols and the blueprint for the political process calls for the formation of a transitional governing body with full authority that includes military and security forces. So a common ground has to be found in which those security officials belonging to this senior regime leadership with blood on their hands who are with direct complicity to war crimes cannot be a part of that process. There has to be justice. There has to be accountability. The war crimes must end. The starvation campaign must end. And the consistent firebombing and barrel bombs that are being dropped on Aleppo as we speak and on the Damascus suburbs must stop. It is a transitional process that will require some buy-in of reconcilable elements of the regime, but there has to be an accountability process for senior leaders that we believe are directly complicit in war crimes in Syria.
Oubai, thank you very much for making your point clear. We do appreciate you coming on the show. Oubai Shahbander there from the Syrian Support Group.